We begin tonight with news that has shocked the nation. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has resigned just months out from the May election.
I'm going to interrupt you there, Peter. We now have breaking news that YouTuber Jordan Shanks-Marcanova, otherwise known as FriendlyJordies, will be put forward as the candidate to replace Albanese in the Grayndler by-election.
I mean, let's be real. I never planned on being here, but I cannot stand by and watch that cancer of a party they call the Greens torpedo one of the most competent governments of the last century. Mark my words, Max Chandler Mather, however you say your name, you and your self-righteous Fitzroy swine will pay.
We've only been waiting 4 years to do this video, and only about half of our patrons have requested it. We're going to play out Jordies becoming PM. So right now, most of Labor don't want to touch him with a 10-foot pole, but an existing issue could very well see a demand for a Paul Keating figure down the track: the Greens. Last year, we saw the Greens hold up Albo's Housing Affordability Future Fund in the Senate, and previously, they torpedoed Kevin Rudd's emissions trading scheme in 2009. In this timeline, let's just say Albanese wins the 2025 election against Dutton, causing Dutton to be ousted and replaced with a Liberal war hero, Andrew Hastie. Emboldened after the victory, Albanese plays a less risk-averse game and actually tries to rehabilitate Rudd's emissions trading scheme, only to see the Greens once again hold it up in the Senate. After a year of gridlock, Albo's stuck in a lose-lose. Either double down and keep the news cycle going, or back down and appear weak. Something that Rudd himself called his greatest regret as Prime Minister. As the new year rolls around in 2028, having been in the job for 6 years, Albo's appetite for the campaign trail is waning, and Labor's on path to lose to Hastie. But there's a young MP, the Minister for Hughes, Riley Campbell, who pitches a groundbreaking idea. What if Albo retires on his terms and we bring in Labor's greatest cheerleader, someone who makes 1-hour videos critiquing the Greens just for fun? Campbell makes the point that this is a similar point in history to 1991. Labor's been in for over half a decade, and the idea of a peacemaker PM has passed its use-by date. In the same way that Hawke had to go for a wrecking ball in Keating, Albo has to go, and in order to eviscerate the Greens, they need FriendlyJordies. In an incredibly risky move, Campbell pitches the idea to Albo. For a tense moment, the Prime Minister looks at his junior MP and pauses.
This tired man is so relieved you've pitched that, Riley, mate. That's genius.
Campbell tells Albo that they'll need to convince Jordies to go for it before taking it to caucus. Albo tells Campbell to leave it with him.
Albo, as flattered as I am, no way do you want me as Prime Minister. I'm too busy with FriendlyJordies stuff anyway.
Look, mate, I hear you, but can you imagine the views you'd get on a video called I Became Prime Minister of Australia?
Damn.
After that, it didn't take much more convincing. Jordies was on board. As Albo pitched it to caucus, it was obviously a little insulting to all the MPs who'd hustled in ministries for decades, but Campbell had prepped key ministers like Jim Chalmers and Richard Marles. When the caucus had seen that they'd gone for it, only some ministers like Mark Dreyfus stood in opposition. As you saw in the intro, Albo retired and Jordies came in, but only narrowly won Grayndler against the Greens' Rachel Jacobs. The news that Jordies became the Prime Minister was actually broken on his YouTube channel, with the video clocking 15 million views.
Oh, Jordies, you can't be Prime Minister cause all you do is make jokes about Yilmaz.
Well, here I am, baby.
But there was work to do. Labor was polling great in Gen Y and Gen Z, but terribly amongst Boomers and Gen X. After all, the Libs had a war hero in opposition. Labor really needed one of their own, and in came a guy called Ray Gromas. Someone who didn't actually fight with the Australian army, but went to Ukraine of his own volition, losing his eye. From there, Jordies' campaigning was masterful. Using 2020 Common Sense Brigade tactics, Jordy made his whole campaign about there being a Liberal Greens coalition. After all, they teamed up to vote down the ETS. Having always refrained from the culture wars, Jordies also decided that this was too good of a tool to pass up.
This Liberal opposition has to be the wokest government in Australian history.
Tactically, he'd brought his friend Isaac Butterfield along to campaign with him.
They literally are siding with the vegans on this one. Cyclists vote Liberal, vegans vote Greens, that only leaves Labor left.
In a stroke of genius, Jordies had stolen any culture warrior plays out of the hand of the Libs. This left Hastie with just one move: drum up fear of China. But this was where Gromus came in clutch. Any China debate was outsourced to him. He literally fought against Putin's army, so when Gromus said we need to cool the jets with China, no one could accuse him of being a coward. Still, the Liberals were $1.20 to win, whereas Labor stood at $2.40. As Anthony Green kicked off election night, things were looking pretty comfortable.
So we're calling Cook and Dixon a win for the Liberals.
But as it hit 8 PM, things started to go horribly wrong for Hastie.
This Justin, Macquarie Cowan and Eden Monaro have now been called for Labor, meaning just one more seat is needed. Actually scrapped that I can now confirm that Hastie is en route to concede defeat.
At 9 PM, it was time for Jordies to take centre stage.
I have always believed in miracles. How good is Australia? And how good are Australians? This is a win for the true believers.
In what was even better news, Jordies' sledgehammer campaign against the Greens meant that they lost 5 seats in the Senate, with Labor picking up 4 of them. President Trump gave a muted congratulations, while Xi Jinping expressed his elation at Australia voting against xenophobia. But now Jordies was in, and he couldn't just get away with running an opposition campaign, and actually had to put forward his own team and an actual policy agenda. For his role in helping bring Jordies to power, Riley Campbell was given what Jordies considered the most important role: the Minister for the Environment. In fact, Prime Minister Shanks went further than just that, announcing a war against deserts. Campbell and Shanks weren't at all messing around. With states being allocated funding from the GST, Labor made this conditional. To get the funding, states had to reduce their land clearing by 5% each year. Jordies also launched Operation Savoury. He hired over 1,000 educators from the Savoury Institute to run free training for Australian farmers. The stated aim was to use livestock to convert 100,000 hectares of desert into green grassland. To add to that, the laws around floodplain harvesting, essentially diverting a river upstream into your private farm, were massively tightened. Harvesting licenses were revoked, and those caught participating could pay up to $750,000 and receive 2 years in prison. But with the Greens down and out, Jordies could pass the crown jewel: the emissions trading scheme. As corporations were given the carrot, carbon permits, rather than the stick, a tax, their initial skepticism of Prime Minister Shanks quietened. This relationship would only be strengthened as Jordies decided it wasn't worth repeating Shorten's mistake of touching franking credits or negative gearing. His Gen Z supporters would remain desperately disappointed that he didn't touch the housing market. Apart from that, Jordies just let Jim Chalmers run the economy. Regarding other areas of domestic policy, for his opposition to Jordies, Dreyfus was removed as the Attorney General, but instead put as Deputy Prime Minister as a compromise. Fulfilling a promise to his subscribers, Jordies and the new Attorney General gave their advice to the Governor General that someone ought to be pardoned.
I am so thankful to FriendlyJordies, and though he's now the Prime Minister, I will still call him that. I am thankful that this government values integrity.
When it came to integrity, Jordies also passed the Knack Act. Effectively, the National Anti-Corruption Commission had the power to now find criminality. But for someone who dodged the culture wars for so long, he was now finding how effective a campaigning tool it could be. In fact, Jordies rebranded the Arts Ministry to become the Minister for Culture. And who would Jordies choose for such an illustrious role? Well, he got a captain's pick in the Senate.
Yeah, so pretty random, right? Guess I'm a federal government minister, I don't know.
Together, Jordies and Miss Love sat down to discuss how to restore the idea of a uniquely Australian identity.
Miss, the Byzantines thrived because Orthodox Christianity was the societal glue. Kids need to grow up thinking they're more than just atoms and owe some sense of accountability to their maker.
Yeah, that's cool, man. We can make scripture compulsory. We should probably also make Toad Rage compulsory.
Funnily enough, Jordies got one other captain's pick in the Senate to replace the outgoing Penny Wong. However, he'd keep this new guy as his foreign minister.
I just want to help cool the jets here. Taiwan has a right to exist, but we must remember that this is an internal Chinese issue. We believe in one country, 2 systems.
When pressed on how Australia would respond to a PRC invasion of Taiwan, Ali simply replied,
"Why would I sign up our position years ahead without any flexibility for context?"
Of course, America was far from pleased from this, and in a phone call with President Trump, Jordies got blasted. Now, as Jordies often said in his earlier years, to survive, Labor had to kiss the ring and learn from the mistaken boldness of Whitlam and Rudd.
Look, he was just being diplomatic. We've got to pacify the mining lobby here and can't afford to go so gung-ho on China. You've got to remember that their tariffs hit us so much harder than you in 2020. Of course, we'd support you in whatever decision you make in Taiwan.
But as 2028 came to a close and as Trump came to retirement, there was a new election. Representing the Democrats was Gavin Newsom, and representing the Republicans was Ben Shapiro. And I don't need to tell you who won.
Mr. Newsom called me to concede, and I congratulate him on a truly hard-fought campaign. If China even thinks of laying hands on its capitalist neighbor, its capitalist friends will punch back twice as hard.
Watching from Australia, Jordies, Ali, and Defence Minister Gromus were all extremely concerned.
Dude, we need to calm the whole thing down.
No one here disagrees, but I'm not risking properly funded services on this one.
Maybe this is worth it, man. More people will die in the South China Sea than by not funding Medicare.
Well, no, they'll just die from both, because they'll give us the Whitlam treatment and find a way to get the libs back in anyway.
But their concern over Taiwan couldn't last for long because controversy was brewing at home. It was referendum time. As Minister for Culture, Jordies let Mislav have pretty much control over his ministry, and he said he would allow one referendum to do with culture. By 2029, Mislav had his pitch.
Dude, I'm sick of people thinking Seth Cohen is some heartthrob. The guy sucks. If we want to fix this toxic individualistic culture, we have to take a stand. I want it in the Constitution that the OC is overrated.
Jordies let Mislav pitch the idea in caucus, and debate erupted.
I mean, Sandy Cohen's the perfect role model of a father. Who would you rather have Australians look up to? Rufus Humphrey from Gossip Girl?
The room broke out into an angry uproar, but Prime Minister Shanks brought the order.
The ayes have it. We're going to the people.
So get this right. The Prime Minister of Australia has put a constitutional referendum to Australia, not on anything like Brexit or being a republic, but on the teen drama show, the OC. I mean, give me a break.
Despite all the backlash Labor was receiving for going ahead with seemingly such a trivial referendum, Jordies didn't cave.
Well, I for one think it's crucial that we define what we do and don't stand for. Do you think the Byzantines would have thrived if Seth Cohen was their leader?
The referendum was scheduled for later in the year, but before they got there, Jordies had to see off an internal challenge. Mark Dreyfus. Quite simply, Dreyfus argued that the OC farcical was going to result in nothing but Labor being booted into oblivion, and he announced his intention to challenge for the leadership. The numbers were split evenly. The old guard of Dreyfus and Bowen stood against the new guard of Shanks and Campbell. Those like Ray Gromus and Bill Shorten stood in the middle. As both factions tried to court their numbers, Gromus called a press conference.
Today I called the Prime Minister and gave him my complete support as leader of the Labor Party. Building culture is important, and I support the yes vote to the referendum on the OC.
And like that, the momentum for Dreyfus immediately quelled as MPs jumped ship to avoid the ire of Shanks. Dreyfus was left with no choice but to retire to the backbenches, leaving a vacancy for Deputy Prime Minister. For his loyalty, Shanks rewarded Gromus, allowing him to follow the footsteps of Richard Marles as being both Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister. In what was an incredible win for Shanks, Mislav took to the Senate.
You tried to destroy us, but the moral fibre of the party stood stronger. Seth Cohen's aphrodisiac of mediocrity is wearing thin. This is what Toad Rage warned us about.
Unfortunately for Mislav, he'd be overshadowed by a bigger story.
Well, we do have some breaking news right now. Taiwan has suffered a massive cyber attack believed to be at the hands of the PRC, and up to 500 Taiwanese corporations, plus the Taipei government itself, are suspected to have been the victims of the attack.
The scenes in Shanks' cabinet were ugly.
You told me I had 2 more years to work on America before Xi would move.
Dude, if Washington and Taipei didn't know this was coming right now, how on earth am I supposed to know?
Someone get Ray in here right now.
Immediately, Ray Gromus met the pair and together they flew to Tokyo for an emergency quad meeting. President Shapiro didn't mess about.
We're moving our ships into the Taiwan Strait to stop any invading forces right now. This is not a negotiation, and I expect your full support.
Modi didn't bat an eye, and given this was held in Tokyo, Japan gave their full support. But Shanks hesitated.
So, this is a command, not a request. I've got to sell this to the Australian people, otherwise it'll be another Iraq or Vietnam. Anything we do needs to be done in a way that doesn't make a mockery of our sovereignty.
As Jordies took a recess, he debriefed with Ali and Gromus.
We've got no choice. If we oppose it, they'll find a way to get rid of us, and Hasty won't hesitate for a second.
Dude, respectfully, I disagree. China gives us leverage here in a way we've never had before. Let's pull out.
The stress was unbelievable for Jordan. He'd only taken the job to get clicks, and now he was deciding Australia's World War III policy. Shanks withdrew from the meeting to watch MASH in his hotel room. The 70s nostalgia was a safe place for Jordan and he smashed out some late Vietnam War episodes. But the 70s would only bring back the presence of someone else. Someone who could empathise with his struggles. As Jordies remembered the legacy of Whitlam, angry Jordies returned. The Americans had torpedoed one of Labour's finest. Why would he roll over to them with so much at stake? Shanks informed a livid President Shapiro that he needed to withdraw from the meeting and he returned to his suite. Prime Minister Shanks had controlled the situation for too long. The situation instead needed the true FriendlyJordies.
Hey YouTube, remember me?
Akin to Arrested, or Dear Your Majesty, Jordies launched into an angry tirade chronicling the history of the ANZUS relationship. He invoked MacArthur's appalling treatment of the 39th Battalion in New Guinea, the CIA knifing Whitlam, and then Mark Arbib being a US informant against Kevin Rudd. These were his final words.
Dear America, should I not return home or in any way die under mysterious circumstances, Ray Gromas will then become the Prime Minister, in which case he'll join President Xi in declaring war against you. Enjoy that one, Ben.
The video smashed download numbers, hitting 500 million views overnight.
This schmuck is going to be the absolute death of me.
As Jordies just made himself unkillable, he returned home to a ravenous crowd in Canberra. While some had gathered to protest, the general sentiment was one of fanfare for standing up for Australia. As Miss Love welcomed them home, their photograph was taken and they started to be called the Fantastic Four. Well, that was until this news story.
Hi, Ray Gromas. I know you watch this, so don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. According to the mainstream media and woke ABC, this guy is the bee's knees. After all, he fought against big bad Putin in Ukraine. But what if he actually didn't? Sky News has spoken to over 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers this year, and we haven't found one soldier who can corroborate his story. Nor is there a single medical record for his so-called lost eye.
As the story started to gain traction, Jordies met with Gromas.
So, that was a random hit job? Ray, just show me your enlistment papers so I can nip this story in the bud.
Jordies, I'm going to ask you a question. Can you respell the name Ray Gromas?
As Jordies looked at the letters in front of him, everything clicked.
No. It can't be. You're him?
No, I'm not. I've never met the guy. But avenging him by taking you down will be the CIA's greatest ever play.
He then collapsed on the ground next to his orange juice. Gromas put his eye patch on and disingenuously called for help. As calculated, by the time it came, it was far too late.
I don't know how to tell you this since this is easily the hardest news story I've ever broken, and the Prime Minister has died this morning in what we believe to be a political assassination.
The nation's response had everything. Riots, a packed state funeral, and the burning of the American flag across the globe. After all, Jordies said that his death would result in a declaration of war against America. But new PM, Ray Gromas, took charge of the situation.
With ASIO conducting a formal investigation, we have confirmation that the assassins behind Prime Minister Shanks' death were not actually American-based, but Chinese-based. After Shanks had made his threat, his death would be the easiest way to have Australia support the invasion of Taiwan. This is an act of terrorism that we cannot stand for, and to avenge our fearless leader, we will be deploying forces to the South China Sea immediately. I regret to inform you that China just started World War III.
Where am I?
Jordan, you're home. We played Gromas for a fool.